Okay, hi and welcome. I'm Melissa Green, a Technology Accessibility Training Specialist with the Office of Information Technology's Emerging Technology and Accessibility team. Our unit works to ensure that all technology users, including those with disabilities, have a functional and accessible technology experience with our web presence and our instructional and emerging technologies. And you can find more information about our efforts on our website at accessibility.ua.edu. Whether you're sending a note to just a few contacts or crafting a campaign for broad distribution, it's important to make sure your email messages are accessible to people with disabilities. Today's webinar will cover key best practices for creating emails that are accessible to the broadest possible audience. We'll use Microsoft Outlook to create accessible messages, but the practices can also be applied to other email programs and marketing tools such as MailChimp. I'll also share a little bit of information about Outlook settings and features commonly used by people with disabilities. When we offer this session in the classroom, it's usually as a hands-on workshop. Since that's difficult to do in a webinar environment, I'm going to describe what I'm doing as I do it so that if you're interested in following along with the recording later, you'll be able to do so. On this slide, there's a picture of me. I don't have my camera on just to save bandwidth, but I thought you might be interested in seeing who's speaking with you today. So greetings from Melissa and Gordon Palmer. With that, let's jump in. Most of the issues that present barriers to access can be prevented or fixed by following a few simple practices, which we'll look at now. The content in this slide is also available as a handout, which I'll send to you via email along with a link to the recording of the session. The email will include additional resources, including links to relevant Microsoft and MailChimp documentation. I'll also use email as a way of following up with any questions that might come up during the webinar that I might not be able to get to. If you do have questions, feel free to ask them in the chat box as we go along. I'll try to keep an eye on the chat box, although I may have to come back to questions at the end. The first key practice for creating accessible email messages is to use HTML when possible. Nearly all assistive technology is designed to work well with HTML rather than plain text. With HTML, your messages can include formatted links with display text, lists, headings, and alt text for images. I'm switching to my Outlook now. Okay. Sorry, that'll be a little smoother moving forward. So to set HTML as your default format in Outlook, what you want to do is go to File, and then Options, and then the Mail tab. Under Compose Messages, you'll want to select HTML, which is probably the default on your machine. It is the default on mine, and then select OK. After you change this setting, any new messages you create will be in HTML format. Sometimes you might receive messages that are in a plain text format and need to respond to them. So this is an example of an email that was sent in plain text format. This generally happens when someone is writing an email from their phone. A lot of times in order to save data, only plain text formatting is set up on a phone. So if you receive a plain text message, in order to reply to it in HTML, you can select Reply to the plain text message, then select Format Text, and choose HTML. And after you've done that, you can do things like format dates and times in bold. You can add hyperlinks and other formatting that you would not be able to do if that email were in plain text. The next key practice is to describe all visual objects in your email messages with alternative text. So people who are blind or have low vision use an assistive technology called a screen reader to hear content and navigate with the keyboard. The screen reader converts digital text into synthesized speech. Screen readers are also used by people with certain cognitive or learning disabilities, or others who simply prefer audio content over text. Alternative text, or alt text, helps screen reader users understand what's important in images and other visuals. Screen readers speak the alternative text to describe images and other non-text content that users can't see. The alt text isn't just beneficial to screen reader users, though. It's displayed in place of the image in browsers if the image file is not loaded or when the user has chosen not to view images. Also, since alt text is picked up by search engine crawlers as they index the web, alt text exposes online content to search engines. So all of the visual content in your email messages should have alt text. And this includes pictures, clip art, smart art graphics, shapes, groups, chart, embedded objects, ink, and videos. You should also avoid using text in images as the sole method of conveying important information. If you must use an image with text in it, repeat that text in the alt text or in the message body. And let's look at an example of that. So this example is from another university, but I do see a lot of UA-related messages that are comprised mostly or wholly of images of text, as is the case here. So this message, which advertises a course or promotes a course called Writing 415, is meaningless to a screen reader user or a user with a slow internet connection or a user whose email program isn't set to automatically download images. To make it accessible to the broadest possible audience, we need to add alt text to the image. To add alt text to an image in Outlook, you can right-click the image, select Format Picture, select Layout and Properties, and then select Alt Text. You want to enter a description of the content and function of the image in the description field. So right now in the description field, there's really some gibberish that refers to the name of the image file and where it was located on the computer. So we want to remove that, and we want to enter a description that describes the content and function. So since this image is largely text, a good start with writing alternative text might be to just replicate that text in the alt text. So you would type something like writing WR415 new 2-credit course fall 2017 and so on. You want to, oh, excuse me, I clicked away from that. You want to be sure to include that alternative text in the description field rather than the title field. The reason for that is if someone saves the email as a PDF, or in the case of working with, let's say, a PowerPoint file or a Microsoft Word document, if the reader saves that as a PDF, anything you type in this title box won't be included as part of that PDF. So you want to put your description or your alternate text in the description field. Adding alt text to a chart is a similar process where you right-click the chart, and then instead of selecting Format Picture, you're choosing Format Chart Area, and then Layout and Properties. Same goes with adding alt text to tables, and so on. So switching back to our PowerPoint. In addition to providing alt text for your images or other visual content, the next key practice is to give hyperlinks meaningful display names. And whether they appear in a Word document, a PowerPoint presentation, or Excel spreadsheet, you want to make sure links make sense out of context by avoiding phrases like click here and more, as link text. And this is especially important because screen reader users often navigate from link to link, skipping the text in between, or maybe use a keyboard shortcut to view a list of all of the links present on the page. So when you add a hyperlink to your email message, ask yourself, if you read the link text out of content, would you understand what it's for and what clicking it will do? I have an example. I appreciate y'all being patient with me with the switching of screens. This is our first Zoom webinar, and I'm still getting the hang of it. I've already figured out a couple things that I would not do again. So I apologize for your service as guinea pigs, but I also appreciate it. So in the example in this message, the text "click here" is hyperlinked. This hyperlink text is not particularly meaningful. Again, a screen reader user may not read this entire sentence, "click here for workshop descriptions." Instead, they might just bring up a list of all of the links in this email, or tab directly to the link in the email. And what they would hear read aloud in that case is "click here." They wouldn't know why they were clicking. If there were multiple links in the email all labeled "click here," that would be pretty confusing. So instead of something generic or non-descriptive like "click here," we want to edit the hyperlink, which we can do by right-clicking on it and choosing Edit Hyperlink. And in the text to display box, change the text to something more meaningful. So instead of "click here," I might say something like "click here for workshop descriptions." Just go ahead and make that entire statement or sentence a hyperlink. I could also do something like technology accessibility workshop descriptions. That would be even more descriptive, as long as I'm not using "click here." Another principle to keep in mind is that you want to let users know if you're linking to a non-HTML resource. So for example, I'm pretending that our area publishes a monthly newsletter, and in this email message, I'd like to include a link to that newsletter. That newsletter happens to be published as a PDF on a website. So if I were linking to it, I'd be linking to a PDF. If that were the case, in the actual link text, I'd like to add information about that PDF. So I would right-click this text, select Hyperlink, and instead of just displaying the text June 28 newsletter, I would add in parentheses PDF. And the point of that is just to give the user more information about what's going to happen when they click on that link. That's very important for screen reader users. A screen reader might sometimes not switch its focus from one window, let's say Outlook, to another window, let's say the PDF on a website. So it's important to tell the user that something has happened, that they should be going to a PDF on a website. It's also just helpful in terms of usability. I know that if someone sends me a link, I like to know what I'm clicking on and what's going to happen when I click on it. Is it going to open up a program on my computer? Will it start downloading a file? Will it play music or play a video? So make your hyperlink text descriptive, and if you're linking to something like a document, be sure to provide that information in the link text itself. In MailChimp, you can use the editor toolbar to turn text into a link. Just make sure that the text you're linking to, again, is sufficiently descriptive. Another impactful practice is ensuring that color is not the only means of conveying information. So people who are blind or have low vision or have color vision deficiency, also known as color blindness, might miss out on the meaning conveyed by particular colors. So for example, if your email message includes a list of, let's say, readings for a class, and you use red font and nothing else to indicate which readings are required and which ones are optional, some of your students are going to miss out on that essential information. In a staff role, perhaps sending out a list of meetings, and people are encouraged to attend all of the meetings, but the meetings in red are optional. Again, if someone can't see that red, they might miss out on important information. It's okay to use the red, but you should also add a symbol or text so that color isn't the only means of conveying which meetings or which readings are required. To find instances of color coding, you will need to visually scan your document. You'll also want to use sufficient contrast for text and background colors. If your document has a high level of contrast between the text and the background, more people can see and use the content. One way to do this with Outlook in particular is to use the automatic setting for font colors, which ensures that the text displays well if the user has turned on high contrast mode. And we'll talk about high contrast mode in just a few minutes. You can also visually scan for text in your message that's hard to read or to distinguish from the background. Another way to identify instances of low contrast is to print your message in grayscale. A couple resources for checking color contrast that our team likes to use, and I'll include links to these in the follow-up email, are Color Contrast Analyzer by the Paciello Group and the WebAIM Color Contrast Checker. The WebAIM Color Contrast Checker is depicted on this slide, and both of the tools let you enter color values or use a color picker to select colors and check to see if color combinations meet contrast ratio guidelines. And having sufficient contrast, again, is necessary for people with low vision, but is also beneficial for someone who's trying to read your message in bright sunlight, perhaps on their smartphone while they're walking across the quad. I haven't been able to try it out because it's a paid feature, but it's my understanding that the MailChimp inbox preview tool also includes a colorblind view so you can see how your campaign might appear to subscribers with color vision deficiency. In addition to using accessible font colors, you need to use accessible font format. Some people who have dyslexia describe seeing text kind of swim together on a page where one line of text compresses into the line below. They may also see text merge or distort. For people who have dyslexia or have low vision, you can reduce the reading load, so the amount of concentration or effort necessary to read, by using larger font sizes. I like 11 point or larger, as well as familiar sans serif fonts like Arial or Calibri, and ample white space between your sentences and paragraphs. You might also avoid using all capital letters and excessive italics or underlines. So back in Outlook, you can set the font for a specific message just by changing it on the fly in the font and font size boxes. So I've selected some text here. Up in the message tab in the basic text group, I can select the font and the font size to change that just for this message. But instead of changing the font for each time you create a new message, you can set it once as the default for all messages. And you do that by going to File, and then Options, and then Mail. Under Compose Messages, you'll want to select Stationery and Fonts. And then under Personal Stationery, you can specify the font for new mail messages and the font for replying or forwarding messages. So I'm going to select the font for new mail messages. And this is where I could change the font to something a little easier to read. So let's say, for example, Seago UI size 12. And after making those changes, I can click OK. We'll see that change applied in the preview. And then after saying OK and closing out all the dialog boxes, any new mail messages that I create will have that new font. And you can do the same to adjust the font guidelines in your signature. This is something you may want to keep in mind if you're using the standard UA signature, as many of us are. So when the online signature creation tool was originally created, the contrast, there were some contrast issues. It was not as accessible as it could be. That's since been updated, but you might need to double check your signature just to make that the grays in particular are dark enough and provide sufficient contrast on that white background. And you can use some of those color contrast tools I mentioned in order to do that. So in addition to changing fonts, font sizes, font colors in individual messages, you can go ahead and change those settings to have them applied every time you send a new message or send a reply or add your signature. You can also enhance the accessibility of your email messages by using built-in headings and styles and using list styles appropriately. Let's take a look at an example of that. A lot of us are accustomed to using visual styles to break up content in documents or email messages. So making the title text larger or bold, as I'm doing now. Maybe breaking up the content by using formatting like underlines or italics or color in order to indicate the different parts or structure of a message, whether it be an Outlook message, a MailChimp message, and so on. So while this works for a visual user can see that sort of the title or most important information in my message is about the university. They can tell that because it's larger and it's red and it's bold. Someone who can't see, isn't able to use those visual cues to pick up on that information. It's also problematic because it doesn't enable assistive technology users to jump between headings. So to jump from about university to administration to history and so on without skipping information in between. So if that's problematic, what's the alternative to that? How can we effectively format and structure the content in our message? Well, the answer is to use headings and lists. Headings and lists provide structural context to users and enable navigation and easier searching in the document. The simplest way to add headings to a Microsoft Outlook message is with heading styles. Using heading styles means you can also quickly reformat your document and reformat its design without having to manually change each heading's text. So to add headings, you select the text you'd want to use as a heading. I'm going to do that. Then go to the Format Text tab. On the Format Text tab, I'm moving my mouse pointer over the different headings that are available. And you can see that the style of the text I selected is changing each time I move my mouse over a different style. I'm going to select heading 1 for this top level heading about the university. When using headings, you want to use them in a logical order. So heading 1, then heading 2, and then heading 3, rather than heading 3, heading 1, and heading 2. So I'm going to select the heading styles that best reflect the structure of my document. So about the university is the top level heading. The information about the university in this message includes information about its administration. So that's going to be a second level heading. The university's history, the university's mission and objectives, and university policies. I'm going to say that mission, vision, and core values kind of fall under mission and objectives. So I'm going to mark those as heading level 3. So yes, we've changed the visual appearance of the text, but more importantly, we provided important structural information that a screen reader or other assistive technology user can use to jump from section to section. And maybe it's not as big a deal with an email message, but this is particularly impactful when we talk about Microsoft Office documents, especially long ones. So my preferred approach when working with heading styles in Microsoft Office is to not worry about the visual appearance of the headings until I've finished applying them. So I'll go through and kind of set up my headings, and then I'll select Change Styles to choose how I want these headings to appear. So I've selected Change Styles in the Format Text tab in the Styles group. I'm hovering over Style Set, and I have the ability to preview all the different style sets. And as I mouse over each of them, the visual appearance of my headings automatically updates. So I could choose whichever one I like the appearance of the best. One of the reasons why people are sometimes reluctant to use headings is because they don't like the appearance of the built-in styles, or maybe they've already gone to a great deal of work to specify the visual appearance of their Outlook message or their document. You can actually specify how your headings look. So let's say, for example, I did want this about the university to be bold and crimson. I could make that change, or in my existing document, I could select that text about the university and then right-click on heading 1 up here in my styles group and select Update Heading 1 to match selection. Now all of the heading 1s in the document will have that appearance I specified. Same goes for heading level 2. Let's say I wanted these to be underlined. I could underline one of them, right-click on heading 2 in the styles group and choose Update Heading 2 to match selection, and all of the heading level 2s would update accordingly. So in addition to adding that important structural navigational information, using the headings makes it really easy for you to change the visual appearance of your guide quickly, of your message quickly, that is. Using bullets and lists appropriately also enhances accessibility. So rather than typing or inserting a symbol, as I've done here, so here's a bad example under our core values, you want to create your list by using the built-in bullets and lists. So in this case, instead of typing the hyphens as I did, I would want to go to Format Text, and in the paragraph group, select the bulleted list. Or if this was a sequence of steps I wanted to communicate, I could select the numbered list. It's important to use numbered lists when you're communicating a sequence of steps. If you're just communicating a list of items or several pieces of information and it doesn't matter what order they're in, you would want to use the bullets. A screen reader user, when that list is announced, is informed whether or not it's an ordered list, so a numbered list that they need to follow the steps of, or an unordered list that just lists items, not necessarily in order. When including tables in your email messages, it's important to use a simple table structure and specify column header information. Screen readers keep track of their location in a table by counting table cells. And if a table is nested within another table, or if a cell is merged or split, the screen reader may lose count and not be able to provide information about the table after that point. Blank cells in a table could also mislead someone using a screen reader into thinking that there's nothing more in the table. Screen readers also use header information to identify rows and columns. So Microsoft Office allows you to mark the first row of a table as a table header. The general process is to find the table formatting options in the ribbon and then check header row for each table. And you do that by positioning the cursor anywhere in the table. That will cause the Table Tools tab to appear up in the ribbon. Then in the Table Tools Design tab, in the Table Style Options group, you would select the Header Row checkbox. Now, just some general tips. You want to keep the background of your messages simple and clean so the text stands out. Some people use stationery and themes in Outlook that includes backgrounds and patterns. You can adjust the stationery or theme applied to your messages by selecting the File tab, then selecting Options, selecting Mail, selecting Stationery and Fonts, and then on the Personal Stationery tab, selecting Theme. Some of these themes are pretty inaccessible. This iris is an example of one. So this theme is inaccessible because there's not sufficient contrast between the colors in the foreground and the colors in the background. Both the formatting for a hyperlink and the background color are purple, so making that very difficult to read. There's also very little contrast between the color used for bullets and the color of the background. So several of these themes are pretty inaccessible. I would just encourage you to choose wisely or maybe not use a theme at all. Keep things simple. You can also adjust a single message's background by opening the message. I have an example here. Going to the Options tab, and in the Themes group, selecting Page Color, and then selecting No Color, and that will remove the background image. I find myself using this a lot, not necessarily for accessibility purposes, but let's say I receive an email about a webinar, and I want to forward it out to my colleagues in OIT. I'll hit forward to forward that message, and I'll go to type some information to add to it, and what I'm typing is difficult to read because of the background that the original sender selected. I'll then go to Options, Page Color, and remove that color in order to make my message readable to everyone. In addition to keeping your background simple and clean, you'll also want to use descriptive subject lines. Use responsive templates. This is particularly important when we're talking about email campaigns conducted using a tool like MailChimp. So using responsive templates, that will ensure that the reading order of your message is preserved no matter what device someone is reading it on. You need to ensure the accessibility of embedded or linked audio and video, and really linked or attached documents as well. So it's not enough that just the content of your message is accessible, but any additional media that you're linking to or attaching needs to be accessible as well. Finally, offer a plain text version of your message. And again, this is a feature that is present in most email campaign programs, such as MailChimp or Constant Contact. If you're using Outlook on the web, which we as UA employees would access via webmail.ua.edu, you can use the accessibility checker in Outlook web app. Like the Microsoft Office spelling checker tells you about possible spelling errors, the accessibility checker in Word, PowerPoint, Excel, and Outlook on the web tells you about possible accessibility issues in your Office files. While writing a message using Outlook on the web, you can access the checker by selecting the extended menu, so that's represented by 3 dots, then selecting Check for Accessibility Issues. This is not available in Outlook on the desktop yet, but I anticipate it will be coming soon. Let's talk a bit about Outlook settings and features commonly used by people with disabilities. So Outlook works with the accessibility features built into the Windows, Mac, iOS and Android operating systems, which means that Outlook users can use keyboard shortcuts, screen readers, speech recognition, and other features such as color contrast that they can set up on their device. So just for an example, in Windows, ease of access options can help make it easier to use the PC without a display. So the narrator function, for example, lets users hear audio descriptions for elements on the screen, like text and buttons. There are also options that make it easier to see what's on the screen. So you can make the content bigger using magnifier or turning on a high contrast mode that will alter the colors on the screen to make them easier to see. Some people see white on black better than black on white. Others see better with combinations of black and yellow or blue and yellow. High contrast mode is one way of adjusting those settings. You can also adjust Windows and other operating systems as well. I'm just using Windows as an example to make it easier to use your keyboard. So in Windows, there are features like sticky keys, toggle keys, filter keys, or the on-screen keyboard that are easier to use for some users. Sticky keys is one of my favorites. If you ever have to use keyboard shortcut combinations like Control-Alt-Delete or Control-C or Control-V. That can be difficult for some folks who have limited mobility in their hands, or maybe have one hand or don't have all of their fingers. And if you set up sticky keys, you can strike the keys in sequence instead of hitting them all at the same time. So instead of having to hold down Control, Alt, and Delete all at the same time, you could just hit Control, then Alt, then Delete, and it would do the same thing. There are also features that make it easier to use the mouse. So you can change the pointer size or turn on mouse keys to use your keypad in order to move the mouse. So these are just some examples of some of the things that people who are receiving your email messages may be doing to make it easier to use the computer or to access and interact with the content that you're sending them. Following the accessibility practices we've discussed make it possible for people who are using those options to access and interact with your messages. Some users use their Outlook settings to enlarge the text in the subject lines and column header, or change their font so that they're easier to read. This is another reason why it's important to use very brief and descriptive subject lines. So based on the settings on the user's computer, some folks may not see your entire subject line, so it's helpful to be as succinct as possible and as direct as possible. Other users might change their Office theme, so the background color and design of all of their Office programs, in order to make Office programs easier to see or less distracting. On this slide, there are some examples of how a couple different themes appear across Microsoft Office, the color theme and the dark gray theme. These are just things to keep in mind as you develop your email messages, knowing that some of your users may not see them in the same environment in which you are writing them. They might appear differently. An exciting feature is that Outlook on the web now offers the ability to enable a mail tip that alerts coworkers to your preference for accessible content. So after a user enables the feature, whenever someone sends that person an email or adds them as a recipient for an email, the sender receives a notification that the recipient prefers accessible content, and they receive a link to the accessibility checker. So if the checker finds any accessibility issues in the email, those issues will be listed along with instructions on how to fix them. So just another way of saying that is that if I have accessibility needs, I could indicate that in my Outlook settings, and if you start to write me an email, you'll receive a message that states, Melissa has accessibility needs. Please use the accessibility checker to ensure that your content is accessible to her. It appears in a way that's similar to an out-of-office message. Some folks have it set up such that their out-of-office message appears as soon as you put their email address in the to field. It works in a similar way. So right now, this is only on Outlook on the web, but it should eventually make its way to Windows desktops too. So in conclusion, the university is committed to providing technology users, including those with disabilities, a functional and accessible technology experience with our web presence and our instructional and emerging technologies. So whether you're sending a note to just a few contacts or crafting a campaign for broad distribution, it's important to make sure your email messages are accessible to people with disabilities. Most of the issues that present barriers to access can be prevented or fixed by following the key practices we've discussed today. And by taking these steps, you can create emails that are accessible to the broadest possible audience. So we're here to help. You can visit us at accessibility.ua.edu. We also have plenty of time. If anyone has any questions for me today, feel free to unmute your microphone and ask those aloud or to utilize the chat box.